When you said that torture in Uzbekistan is widespread and systematic, Uzbekistan accepted very seriously, maybe because it also was a chapter of the criminal law, threshold criminal law, saying that actually they can be tried for the crime against humanity. And they try to do something like to meet your requirements and your benchmarks. Did you see that they were really moving in the right direction?
Well, on widespread and systematic, they did not make much of a point out of it in 2003. It was only after Andijan that they realized what these words, the implications of that, the legal implications. And so Andijan came to me also as a shock. Of course, those who have been living in the country, maybe they could have expected such things to happen. I was, it is difficult to monitor and to follow it from a distance, you see. Anyway, I gave them initially the benefit of the doubt that at least they would start to reform the system of the judiciary, of also the role of the judges, the independence of the courts. Although I hoped that these recommendations would lead to reform, and in fact they did some. I thought at that time they did some perhaps empty, maybe not empty, but symbolic gestures. The abolition of the death penalty is in itself a very important announcement. But what is the alternative there? What people might have been died in prison, in custody, in larger numbers. The habeas corpus legislation. Well, what does it mean if it is judicial review of the detention and the judge are not independent? So all this looked good or promising in the books, but I learned more and more, also those who have been following it more closely, that this was window dressing and these were largely empty gestures, and I was quite deeply disappointed by that.
Why do you think the Uzbekans so stick to torture? Why Karimov even rejected a kind of an offer to condemn torture? Why the torture is so important to the regime?
Well, this was my first recommendation, that the head of state would condemn the practices. He did not do it. I think he realized very much that they were still relying on these practices, and that for this reason, although he could also, condemnations could also be just verbal, you see. So it might have ended into a play of words. That is also the danger. Well, we have, and that is the problem about diplomacy. Diplomacy is often a matter of words and symbols, but what is the reality on the ground? And that is why the regime, in fact, refused anymore to allow my successor to visit, to allow other rapporteurs of the United Nations to come to Uzbekistan, and so they are, and to allow an independent inquiry of the massacre of Andijan, because they are afraid. They are not afraid of words, perhaps, but they are afraid and frightened to be faced with the realities.
Yeah, but when Karimov didn't condemn the torture, does it mean for you, from your experience, that actually he stands on a kind of position that torture is good?
Well, it's difficult to answer. I cannot see, go into the thoughts and stance of a man I don't really know. Although, when I said torture is systematic, then I wanted to say it's a part of the system. It is whenever there are, I would initiated criminal procedures and proceedings, the torture phase or the torture is an important means to come to statements and confessions of those who are being accused. So it has been, and it might have been already grown into the system for longer, you see, and also under the Soviet period already. So I wouldn't say it's a part of the culture, because I have a high belief of culture, but it was a part of an existing practice for long.
What do you think about today's situation in Uzbekistan? As human rights activists say that torture is still widespread. Do you hear, or maybe you have your own sources who say like if it's still the same or maybe it's worse or got a bit better?
Well, I have no other sources of information than those of organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and others. And I know from my experiences that these organizations are credible, are reliable. So I rely on their information. And when they argue that the situation is worse than 10 years ago, I would incline to believe them. Although in official United Nations reports, you get sometimes a different picture, and that is very tragic. So then you're seeing different realities. What is fiction and what are facts? You see, and. In that sense, I, of course, also certain of these civil society organizations sometimes make mistakes. And in my work as rapporteur, I have also relied largely on them, and I checked and counter-checked that, because if 90% of your report is correct and 2% is error, they are going to exploit those 2%. So we have to insist and to carefully look at the information you are receiving. But I must say that by and large I have always given a lot of credit to these reports of human rights organizations, because they have not necessarily a vested interest in that. Karimov has certain vested interests, economic, political interests, but if a human rights organization can report that things improve, that is only a progress and a matter of joy if you think that your actions have had certain effects. But that is regrettable, and that I consider also as very disappointing, that the situation in Uzbekistan has not improved. There are countries I have visited and I've worked with where there has been considerable improvement, in Latin America, also in some other parts of Eastern Europe, and that in itself is very welcome. And so let us not be too pessimistic in the long run. You see, there is now a dictatorship in Burma. Myanmar is it called, that shows now also signs of improvement, and so I have not given up hope, but the question is still what will happen under the present dictator.
Yeah.
But he has no eternal life as a dictator.
Mr. Van Boven, you said that theoretically Karimov and his regime already can be brought to justice, to international criminal law, just because of torture. Do you think, is it so? So can you confirm that according to international law?
Yeah, surely, because particularly Uzbekistan has ratified. They have ratified many human rights treaties, and they think they can get away with that. But they have ratified also the Convention Against Torture, the United Nations Convention. And in that convention there is a provision on what is called universal jurisdiction. So basically a state has to punish its own criminals. But if that does not happen, cannot happen for one reason or another, the international community, other states could be willing, but that's difficult to predict, but to prosecute and to punish or to convict leadership. That is quite disappointing, therefore, that Karimov visited Brussels last year, because without any implications of that. So that gave him more respectability, whereas he should be brought to justice as a criminal. So we have not reached that stage. But legally speaking, politically speaking, it's difficult. Legally speaking, there are the tools, the means, and the provisions to prosecute and convict.
Yeah. But the last question: in which scenario do you think is it possible that Karimov and his accomplices gonna face justice?
Well, at the conference we have been attending, of course, some leaders now in the Arab world. I would not ask for revenge, you see, where we had certain leaders who were just killed after a mock trial, like in Romania, Ceausescu. There is also the Gaddafi was killed. Everyone, the worst criminal, deserves a fair trial. And so I would not exclude that in due course what is happening now in certain countries, Mubarak's name is mentioned, that it will happen also in due course in Uzbekistan. The problem is, of course, we cannot say be patient, wait and wait and wait. The people get impatient. And then we should, as was said also at this conference, we should show at least solidarity, that we stand on their side, that we don't forget them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Boven.